Hello, everybody. Thank you for attending the webinar. Before we start, two things. First, on behalf of the SAFEWATER project and my colleagues, I would like to thank the UK Research and Innovation Fund and the Global Challenges Research Fund for sponsoring the SAFEWATER project. Also, the ESRC for giving us the opportunity to take part in the Festival of Social Sciences. The next part is to remind the audience about the format of the event. We are going to start with a presentation, and then at the end, there will be questions and answers. So can I ask you then to write down your questions using the question and answers window that you can open by clicking on the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen. Okay, thank you very much. My name, Janeet Rondon-Sulbaran, Research Associate from the Ulster University, the SAFEWATER project. And today, my colleagues, David Pineda and Catalina Herrera from the Center for Science and Technology of Antioquia in Colombia, and Mike Brennan from Ulster University, will be telling you about our work in the SAFEWATER project. We would like to talk about our contribution as social scientists in solving complex problems, specifically the problem of safe drinking water in rural communities in developing countries. We will set our project in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals. We're going to tell you then about the methodology applied in the project, and we're going to present the case study of providing access to safe drinking water in rural communities in Colombia. So we'll start with the SDGs. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals were adopted in 2015 by the 193 United Nations member states. They were set out in a document called Transforming Our World, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So the agenda and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals provide a shared blueprint for all countries for peace and prosperity in the world. The Sustainable Development Goals are a framework for eliminating poverty, for tackling challenges of climate change, and for promoting and fostering social inclusion and equality in the world. So they have 169 targets and 232 indicators. These are universal goals, and they apply to all countries, developed and developing countries alike. So the targets are aspirational. These are aspirational goals. So it depends on each government to set up their own targets and to consider their own national realities to apply the goals. We would like to tell you also that the Sustainable Development Goals are interconnected and they work in synergy. So they cover a wide range of complex social, economic, and environmental challenges. And they emphasize the interlinkages of the three dimensions of sustainable development: the social, the economic, and the environmental dimension. So achieving one goal depends on achieving other goals, and that's the synergy then and interconnection of the Sustainable Development Goals. They are applicable and they are relevant to all countries in the world or vulnerable groups within countries. So it is important then that we take into account the context of one another of the goals in their achievement. The SAFEWATER project is focused on SDG 6. SDG 6 is the clean water and sanitation goal to ensure clean water and sanitation for all by 2030. So the problem is that there are billions of people around the world that still don't have access to basic water and sanitation services. There are 3 billion people in the world that lack basic hand washing facilities at home. And as we know now, hand washing is very important for the prevention of the spread of COVID-19. So the challenges are big, and these are related to water scarcity, water pollution, degraded water ecosystems, water conflicts, and it's necessary then as well to increase the speed up the level of progression of water, of the safe water, the sustainable development goal 6, in order to achieve it by 2030. So what are we doing then? The Safe Water is working on that. So what we're doing is we are developing low-cost technologies for safe drinking water in developing countries. So that's the overarching aim of the project. However, Safe Water is also interested in social impact. We are interested in innovation. And we say innovation, by that we mean creating value, creating social value from ideas. So our sponsors, the UK Research and Innovation and the Global Challenges Research Fund, are very much focused in the implementation of the SDGs. The GCRF in particular is focused on the progress of the Sustainable Development Goals. So we obtain funding from these organizations and bodies that offer funding in the UK, and they were particularly interested in this area of the SDGs. The lead of the project Safe Water is the Ulster University, and we work in partnership with the University of Medellin in Colombia, with the Center for Science and Technology of Antioquia in Colombia, with the University of São Paulo in Brazil, and with Fundación Cántaro Azul, or the Cántaro Azul Foundation in Mexico. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Mike Brennan, who's going to tell you more about the structure of the Safe Water Project, our organization, and the methodology in relation to the social science aspect of the project.
Okay, Janeet, so thanks very much, and thanks for attending this session. My name is Mike Brennan. I teach innovation and entrepreneurship and creativity at the Ulster University Business School. And just to remind you that the focus of Safe Water is about developing low-cost solutions and technologies for water challenges. Now, on this slide, you can see that this involves academics and researchers from different disciplines. It also involves societal actors, in other words, people who understand the challenges in real world settings in different parts of the world. And also it involves an advisory group of people who have worked in this area for many years, who help us to focus in and make sure that our research and activities are relevant to the people who have the problem. So on the right-hand side of this, you can see this interaction is really important, especially from a social science perspective, because we have different stakeholders involved. And it's very important that the different perspectives are recognized as we go about our business of trying to come to real world solutions. So this is why in the past, technological solutions are often given prominence in these sort of projects, but what we've found is the social science is as important, especially in terms of making sure that solutions are actually delivered and maintained by the people who have the problem in the part of the country or part of the world that they live in. So in my next slide, I'll just give you a bit of a background about our approach. So this looks like a very, if you're a student, you'll be like impressed by this sort of detail, but it looks very complicated, but it's not really. So basically, to explain this is our approach to undertaking our research. And as you'd say, we have about 100 researchers in different parts of the world. So it's very important that we try to approach our work in a comprehensive and understandable way. So that's what this slide shows you. So you can see that on the top right, top left-hand corner, you can see the typical way in which academics and researchers tackle a problem. So the white dot at the top is really the goal of a research project. It's a problem. It's where people are trying to investigate something. And the black dot under that is where you have academics who work towards solving that problem. Now, a really important point is that usually academics work in disciplines. So you have engineering or science or management or psychology, and they focus in on solving or addressing a research problem. So that's got a benefit. It means that we've got great focus, everybody understands what they're doing, and we have recognized experts globally who can contribute to that. However, there's a problem. The problem is that that can mean that you've only got one or a very limited perspective. And what we found, a lot of research teams investigating the Sustainable Development Goals, is that in the real world of lots of different stakeholders, often conflicting information and knowledge and needs, that can be give you a partial solution. So what we've tried to do is, if you look at the bottom right-hand side, this is this idea of transdisciplinarity, and it's really crossing disciplines and also crossing between academics and also societal stakeholders. That's really important. So in the gray shaded area, you can see academia, and each of these black dots is really a discipline: engineering, management, science, healthcare, and so on. On the right-hand side of the shaded area in white, you can see that's societal partners, people who are families, farmers, businesses, charities, universities, hospitals. And the idea is that we interact across the two, the gray area and the white area, towards this research activity that we're dealing with. Now, the benefit of that is you have multiple perspectives, because it means that in a particular setting, you might have the need for clean water, but also you have the need for economic development and to create jobs and employment and wealth in a community. And sometimes those things are actually conflicting, which is a really significant problem in sustainable development. And that's where you can try to, the benefit is you have these perspectives and you can reconcile differences and so on. Now, the problem with this approach is that it can be very messy. It can be, knowledge can be contested. So you can have this sort of conflict between different stakeholders who are involved in this process. So that's what we have tried to do. We have tried to move from a disciplinary approach, which is very powerful, to also include this transdisciplinary approach, which we found quite a powerful and challenging way of doing things. And from a social science perspective, it means that we're looking at socio-technical systems where human beings use the technology, where it has to be relevant to them, it has to solve real problems. And that's where this sort of approach can be very rewarding. So if you look at my next slide, you can see how this is from colleagues from Switzerland, Weissman and colleagues who have tried to distinguish between these two complementary approaches. So you can see on this diagram by Weissman that on the blue side of this figure, you can see that the conventional disciplinary approach, which is looking at the forefront of science and engineering and management. And on the right-hand side, the green side, you can see the transdisciplinary approach. And you can start to see how these two complementary approaches look and address problem solving in complementary ways. And that's important. Both these approaches go on in parallel. So for example, you can see that the 11 steps there, they setting the agenda together, number one, from a disciplinary approach, but also from a transdisciplinary approach is interacting with stakeholders, which is really, really important. Because often as academics, we assume we know the answer to a problem. We assume we know the nature of the problem. But often when you speak to people in a real world setting, they'll expand on that or clarify it and make sure that it's clear what that problem is. And so you can see going down the numbers there, clarify responsibilities as academics. And then on 4, you can see accounting to beneficiaries. So this interaction, this interplay between academia and the real world stakeholders is really, really important. And the bottom line, literally at number 11 there, is to secure outcomes. We have to come up with solutions that are literally sustainable with the communities that are involved. And on my next slide, you can see this idea. It's really moving from academia solving problems in a sort of closed setting to working with people and co-creating value. And so SD logic is this idea from management that is very interesting in terms of transdisciplinarity. It's really where moving from products and resources to value, and value that ordinary people find a solution or a value in the sorts of technologies that we introduce. So service logic is really moving beyond products to the idea that values co-created, and this is the whole issue about conversations, dialogue, interaction. And this is why social science is really, really important in making sure that we address the different perspectives that these real world problems have. So that's really a bit of background on it. It can be quite involved, but it's really emphasizing to you, the audience, that this really involves co-creation, working with people to make sure that ideas and technologies are not just imposed from a top-down perspective. So moving back to Janeet then, thanks for that. Okay, Janeet, your sound.
Janeet, your microphone is in mute now.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
Following on Mike's co-creation and service dominant logic perspective, then we're going to tell you how we work then in these communities. The regions are the southern area of Mexico, the state of Chiapas, and in the Antioquia department in Colombia. So we have then used qualitative methods to gather data. So we have had then formal and informal conversations, and with the NGOs working with these communities, we have met and with representatives from the communities. We have also involved the stakeholders in this data collection. So we have met with them and had focus groups. These stakeholders come from different areas of from the public sector, from water services, education, public health, and of course, we have had other sources of information like webinars and face-to-face meetings, training, etc. So from the perspective of that research that we have undertaken, we have gathered then information about the problem of access to safe drinking water in these communities. And from the different perspectives, we have many issues in relation to this problem. For example, the rural communities point out at problems of infrastructure and storage and distribution services, the threats to their culture and traditions, and problems of pollution and deforestation that affect their access to safe water. The key stakeholders point out at top-down approaches that haven't worked in trying to develop this type of initiatives. They point out as well at different methods that have been used for the systems like chlorination that are really incompatible with the culture and traditions of these communities. And very important, for example, from our observations of researchers, is that the spiritual dimension assigned to water is very important, particularly in the indigenous communities of the Chiapas region. So these images show you, you see the scale of the problem. Look at the pollution of the sources. The storage facilities are not very adequate. If we look at the households, you can see there that this is water for domestic use that is stored completely in inadequate ways. And that creates, of course, the contamination of the water that then leads to high levels of waterborne disease, which of course affect both adults and children, but these rates of mortality are really, really high in children. So those are the problems we are facing we're facing in relation to water in these communities. As you can see, these are some examples of services and infrastructure. For example, there are water kiosks in these communities that dispense water at accessible prices. And there are pipe systems that in many cases, as you can see, look very precarious. So how can we then create value? How can we co-create value in water services? From our research, we have then found out that it is important to engage communities in the co-production of activities. So communities have a lot to contribute to these type of projects. They can contribute knowledge, they can contribute ideas, and they could be engaged in the projects from the initiation of the projects and participate in the design of the technologies or the systems that they are going to deem appropriate to their needs. And then that is going to lead to implementation and adoption of these systems and processes. Partners and stakeholders, they need to take into account that they need to consider key aspects of the culture, of the traditions of the communities. That needs to be taken into account into these initiatives that are really, central to co-creating activities and to create systems that are going to then be sustainable. I think, in some, what we have found is that one size does not fit all. So we have learned then that any system, any program, any initiative needs to consider the local contextual factors that people are living there right in the field, in their lives, and the realities that they are experiencing in their own lives. So in order to know about that, Catalina and David are going to tell us then how this process has worked in Colombia and how they have engaged rural communities in the development of low-cost safe water technologies. They have worked together with the University of Medellin. So thank you very much to our colleagues there for all their work. And now I'm going to hand over to Catalina and David, who are going to tell us about the work in Colombia.
Okay, thank you, Janeet. Thank you, Mike. My name is David, or David. I'm talking on behalf of the CTA from Colombia. We thank the Global Challenges Research Fund, GCRF, and the UK Research and Innovation for funding the SAFEWATER project. And we thank the ESRC Festival of Social Science in Northern Ireland and its organizers for giving us the opportunity to present our work and our ideas. And of course, we thank you for listening to us. For us, it is very important to make known the work that we have been doing here in Colombia, as it can be a reference for future work that reaches more communities in need through efficient, well-organized, and well-contextualized work. So this is the Colombian context in the communities we have been working with in the SAFEWATER project. In the Antioquia department, there is a clear gap between urban and rural areas, as close to 97% of the urban population enjoy drinking water and public sewage, while only 62% of the rural population count with aqueducts. But being served by an aqueduct does not necessarily mean having safe water, as only about 26% of that rural population that are served clean drinking water. In some municipalities in Antioquia, the situation is even worse, more severe. For instance, in a municipality called Jardín, 0%, that is not one household of the rural population, get safe water through aqueducts, and only 16% of the rural population in the municipality of Liborina enjoy safe aqueduct water. On the next slide, we can see that paradoxically, Antioquia is a water-rich department in the Republic of Colombia, counted with a humid subtropical climate and a weather system that condenses humidity from the Pacific Ocean and precipitates it over the region. So within the work with the SAFEWATER project, we endeavor to install 54 water treatment systems in households and schools, the municipalities of Liborina and El Peñol, as a pilot to assess the technologies being developed within the scope of the project and to evaluate how the communities will develop around technologies being brought to them. In the next slide, we can see the water uses in the intervened households are precarious in some cases. They use water from the same source, mainly surface waters, for domestic affairs like cooking, drinking, and cleaning, for domestic animals, and for irrigating their crops. They transport the water through self-made aqueducts, pumping by rudimentary electric or mechanical systems built by themselves, with the materials available to them, such as cheap pumps and plastic or rubber water hoses. They use containers like buckets and plastic barrels to collect and store the water, being sometimes a factor that brings recontamination, and they used to disinfect the water by boiling it before the SAFEWATER project. On our next slide, so we can see the aspect of a household in the municipality of Liborina. It's a normal, good house of good people in the rural communities of Colombia and similar economies. At least here, they are blessed with enough surface water and to take and use. I bet some of your families live in similar houses, but some 300 years ago or so. We are a bit behind in development. So projects like SAFEWATER have a huge potential to enhance the quality of life of many communities. On our next slide, in these pictures, you can see some of the infrastructure that the SAFEWATER project brought to these communities. Here we are installing the water treatment systems consisting of a sedimenter for reducing some of the turbidity of the water, 2 microfilters for removing particles, and a UV lamp for disinfecting the water, thus making it safe. This system works with electric energy, which is usually more ubiquitous than the SAFEWATER aqueducts in the department of Antioquia. In the right picture, you can see we often borrow assistance from the beneficiaries as to make them part of the process and for them to know as much of the systems as possible. On our next slides, we have some technicians that are verifying the workings of the system components before delivering them to the households. And on the next slide, these are the technicians when are explaining to the beneficiaries how the system works and how to operate and maintain it. On our next slide shows the water quality at the entry point. As you can see in the picture in the center, the water is quite turbid, and you can imagine the microbiological load as well, as this is water taken from surface waters, often small rivers and ravines with whole ecosystems upstream and downstream. On our next slides, so we deliver this system, these water treatment systems to these communities, hoping to bring a solution that gives them safe water for their domestic use and a higher quality of life. I hope some of the happiness from receiving these systems reaches to you through these images. On our next slide, here, the community learns about the systems and its workings, but also about the importance of having safe water for drinking, cooking, washing, and learning about the dangers and the consequences of consuming unsafe water, and about the methods for avoiding these hazards. On our next slide, here, they learn how to maintain and operate their own new systems. We aim for the social appropriation of science and technology, the process through which people take new technologies for their benefit and improve their lives through it in a virtuous cycle that enhances their lives and diffuses good practices among their own communities. On our next slide, here you can see we strive to bring them the necessary knowledge as for them to safely manage the new technology and even to improve it. This is perhaps one of the main takeaways from the SAFEWATER project here in Colombia. You must create the space as for the communities to give feedback and to improve on the solutions. You have to allow the community to adapt to the technology. And also you have to allow the technology to adapt to the community. This is why, as Janet was mentioning, one size does not fit all, because they have to co-evolve together in order to be sustained and impactful solution. I believe this is the aspect by which social science can contribute the most to initiatives like the SAFEWATER project, and it is by the work of social science that you can deliver a pertinent and a permanent knowledge solution to the people. The next slide, we can see the SAFEWATER project here in Colombia works a lot with children, as we want them also to be part of the solution. They, being the future, ensure that the knowledge transferred, if considered important by them, will be passed to the next generations. Here we do not explain the technical intricacies of the devices, but try to build awareness and sensitivity about the importance of having safe water in their houses. Also, very often children are the most severely affected by the lack of safe water and sanitation in the households. So we try and assess some of the health and behavioral changes in children. Here I pass the mic to Catalina, my colleague.
Okay, thank you, David. Good afternoon. I'm Catalina Herrera. I'm environmental engineer. I have been working with this project SAFEWATER since 2017 with CTA and also with University of Ulster. I'm going to show you some images of activities that we do with the communities for the appropriation of the technology and to bring safe water. So bringing safe water to communities has the objectives of improving the quality of life, especially the impact on health. And for that, we consider health assessment through anthropometric measurements in children, and also the implementation and monitoring of behavior changes in relation to hygiene habits, water users, and use and appropriation of technology. We have been doing that with a WASH approach. In the next slide, you can see other activities with the students. We prioritize some behaviors that we want to influence, and we define an edu-communication strategy around those behaviors related to the use and maintenance of the system, and with water uses and hygiene habits at home and also at school, because we have a system, this technology in 2 rural schools. And for each behavior that we want to change, we define the target audience and an educational strategy, sometimes supported by educational material. And we opted for the social appropriation of technology and social innovation as strategies through which the communities actively participate in the use of the system, and even in its construction and in innovation, in social innovation, and to improve this technology. For this, we go to the communities every month. We work with them, with the children and their families, doing educational activities, training the communities in the use of the technology also. And in the next slide, you can see that in addition, the dissemination of what we are doing is important for us. And that is why we are making an audiovisual record and taking testimonies to allow us to share the experience with other actors, other communities, and among the communities with which we are working. In the next slide, you can see like the customizing, that the people can customize their system. We have also promoted this appropriation through the personalization of the system with drawings made by members of each household. And then we scan them, print them on a material to stick on the system. And this gave another aesthetic sense to the system, and the people have really been very, very happy with that. We also working in other aspects for the social appropriation of the system. We want people to be able to organize as a community to maintain the system over time after the project ends. Because what often happens with these types of projects is that when they finish and people have to put money to make maintenance or fix something, if they aren't organized and don't have an economic plan to assume that, then they stop using the system and go back to consuming unsafe water. So we are promoting these social organizations that allow them and allow the sustainability over the time when safe water project end. For this, we have proposed strategies such as workshops and financial saving incentive games, etc. And this project has been great challenges to get the success we have, and we want to bring safe water to communities. We have the technical challenges, like the development of the technology, their installations, its evaluation and monitoring, and also the challenge to work with a lot of researchers from multiple disciplines, different institutions, different countries, communities, and also different languages that are participating in this project. So we are not only the technical, we don't have only the technical challenges, there were also the challenges of the articulation of all the actors involved and the co-production of knowledge, and the challenge of how to implement this transdisciplinary approach, how to put to dialogue not only the scientific knowledge, but also the empirical knowledge of so many actors and so many disciplines and so many cultures. And we try to solve that in a collective process, in a collective construction with the communities, into face-to-face meetings, generating spaces for discussion, consensus, collaboration, etc. Okay, and in the next slide, yes, David.
Okay, so for closing with us from Colombia, so we have a picture here of focus groups and work with communities to discuss, build awareness and knowledge, document feedback and new practices, and in general aid in the processes of social appropriation of technology. We at the CTA have witnessed and are starting to document cases of abandonment of technology and knowledge by the communities. When communities perceive a solution as too complex or not pertinent enough, they tend to abandon it or to stop the use of said technology. And so resources, knowledge, and effort is lost. That was the situation Catalina was describing just a moment ago. So this is the opposite process to the social appropriation of technology that we strive to trigger. And it is a pitfall for any project that aims to bring some solution to a developing community. With social science, we are starting to study and understand the social appropriation or abandonment of technology and knowledge as to build strategies and take effective action towards making this world a more humane and a better place. Thus, the SAFEWATER project has seen social sciences and applied sciences working together towards delivering the means for obtaining safe water to developing communities. And we wanted to share some of the work that we have been doing and some of the ideas that we are having. So from Colombia, we thank you for listening and hope it has been interesting to you. Back to you, Janet. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David, Catalina. Your delivery was excellent. We learned so much. Thank you. And that concludes our presentation. We want to thank you all for listening. We want to thank the sponsors, the UK Research and Innovation, the GCRF, and the sponsors of this event, the ESRC. Thank you very much. So we can take questions now. There's a question there. Okay, there's a question. How difficult was it to work with government and local authorities? Were they happy for the project to be rolled out, or did you encounter any difficulties? So, Catalina, David, would you like to answer that question? Any of you, or Do you want me to repeat the question or are you happy with it? Difficulties you encountered with government and local authorities in relation to the project, to the rollout of the project. Were they happy? Did you encounter any difficulties? Could you tell us about it?
Okay, because this project is financed by this fund of United Kingdom. We don't involve too much the local authorities, but when we go to the communities, every time we have a meeting with the local authority for tell them about the project and to try to involve them not in the implementation of the system, but yes, for the support, the work with the communities. And we are working in two communities. In one communities, we have success support from the local authority, and in the other, we found that a local authority is like indifferent. But when you talk with them, when you talk with this local authority, they are happy that we do and that we implement the technology, but they don't involve a lot. But I think it's such a that I think we try to involve more the local authorities from the beginning of the project, and with that, I think it's that it's a good practice to have the support of them.
Thank you very much, Catalina, for your answer. I hope that answered the question. There's another question here, very interesting. What issues did you find that you'd like to improve on in the future? I don't know if Mike or David would like to take that question.
Yeah, Janeet, maybe I can answer that one. One of the things you notice with transdisciplinary research is that it can be quite a long process of getting people involved and understanding each other. So what you find is with researchers from different disciplines is that they're very focused on solving the problem as they perceive it. So if I was doing this another time, it would be really to get people together more at different stages and really try to formalize that into a much more systematic way of engaging, because the temptation is for people and researchers to focus in on their own problems or how they perceive it without actually taking the time, if you like, to work with other people. And that's a real challenge because there's a pressure as a scientist to solve the problem. So to allow a little bit more time for people to come together and to explore exactly what are those common problems, how can you agree what's really important from a community perspective, and to actually explore and have a dialogue that way. So that's something that I've learned certainly over the last 4 years.
Thank you, Mike. Very important. Yes, that engagement from the beginning. Would you like to add anything to that, David? I think you were nodding there, and I don't know if you would like to add anything.
Thank you, Janet. I very much agree with Mike in the answer he has given. But to address a little bit more the question for Mr. Phillips, yes, maybe to improve in the future, maybe as Mike was mentioning, the solution was a bit pushy for the communities because it was like scientists trying to solve a problem and to deliver a solution that they thought would be the best for that context. But for instance, in the field, in the communities, for instance, they didn't have much of a steady, stable electric systems. So that the water treatment systems, sometimes they suffer for that. So I think it will be more effective and even more beneficial for the communities to get involved in the problem, describing the problem for the technicians in order to address it. And as Mike was saying, we are from our laboratories all the time, we are trying to solve a problem. instead of understanding first what the problem is or what the situation is on the communities that need that problem solved. So I think it will be good to, before the technology designing steps, to know the community, to know their capacities and the problems they have. So more than trying to solve the problem and just deliver it, not to be too pushy, but to understand each other better from the beginning in order to get a solution that is more pertinent and that will be more sustainable in the future. For instance, in some of the pictures you could see, I bet, the black plastic tanks that we use in the SAFEWATER system for storing the water. So the communities themselves, they realized that was a problem because the sun tended to give a strange taste to the water. So they, by themselves, on their own, they improved on the systems, they painted the tanks with white pictures, or they covered it. In some of the pictures, maybe you could see some big leaves covering the tanks. They moved the systems in order for the sun not to strike them directly. So I think those were some technical issues that were solved by the communities on their own, and they improved on their own. And that social appropriation of technology is what we want to trigger, because that will ensure that the technology will be used in a sustained manner. So as Mike says, that was one of the difficulties from the beginning, and something to improve on the future is that the process is lengthy, because the beginning should be to get to know each other, and then from that knowledge try to understand what the problems are in order to be solved in an efficient manner.
Thank you, David. Yes, very important then to take into account then in these type of projects or initiatives, the valuable, knowledge, experience, ideas that the end users or beneficiaries or communities, whichever way you want to call them, can contribute to these type of projects from the beginning. So thank you, David. That was very, very good. Thank you very much. There's another question here. We don't have a name, it's anonymous, but how do you see the presence or use of the systems in the communities, say in 1 year from now? Very interesting question, yes. Who would like to take this one?
Maybe I can start to answer and you can elaborate on it a bit later, because precisely I've been studying the abandonment of some water systems that were done in some schools here in the Department of Antioquia, mainly because all the load of the work for the maintenance of the water system was done by the teachers of the schools. So when the teacher of the schools leave, nobody has the knowledge to maintain the systems and to operate them. So in the SAFEWATER project, we are trying to get that knowledge, that capabilities to many people in the communities, and to deliver into households that will have more or less a steady population, a steady presence. And as for the knowledge not to be lost and the technology to be abandoned. So I believe in this case, the systems that we are placing in the communities will stay for a bit longer than the previous systems in the schools. And I think if they find it pertinent and if they find it useful, they will keep on using the systems and keep on maintaining, improving, and operating the system. So I think 1 year from now, I think the work we have been doing with the communities will bear fruit, and I think they will keep the capabilities and the systems, and perhaps they will be asking for help if they have some issue that they cannot help solve on their own. What would you say, Catalina? What do you think?
Very good. Yes, David, I think what you're saying is very important, that the systems could be maintained and sustained by the communities, and more important of all, that they could be replicated then in communities facing similar problems, not only in Colombia, but around other countries in Latin America and further beyond.
Indeed, and that will be the best case scenario when communities take this technology as their own and they start to spread it, to diffuse it to other communities, to solve similar problems that they may have. The SAFEWATER systems, they have some components that are difficult to find in Colombia, but maybe we could assist them in getting those components for them to them and for them to diffuse the technologies, or maybe simplify some of the aspects of the SAFEWATER systems in order for them to be more easily diffused and replicable.
Okay.
We don't have more questions here. It's 10 to 3. We had 45 minutes for the presentation. And I think, that concludes our event here. Thank you very much, everybody, for taking part. Thank you very much to our presenters and panelists. And thank you very much to the organizers for the opportunity. So I hope this was worth it. Thank you very much.